Okay, hi everyone. Ashwin and I are here to talk about the transits of the upcoming month of July for the Sidereal zodiac from mostly Jyotish perspective. But we also, of course, always make use of many other astrological traditions in our work. And, if you haven't done so already, please check out Ashwin's great magazine, e-magazine, Celestial Vibes. It's got a lot of really excellent, unique articles on a diverse set of themes in astrology and the philosophies surrounding astrological practice of multiple different traditions and whatnot. And it's been going on for just a little more than a year now, and it's going strong and whatnot. So please check that out, Celestial Vibes e-magazine. And otherwise, we're gonna just jump right into it. Ashwin, thanks for initiating this
Yeah,
video.
absolutely.
So I think we've got, as we were talking before this, we've got just a few themes that we're going to be talking about. There's not as much stuff going on as there was last month as far as ingresses and whatnot. But I'll just list those off real quick. We've basically got the theme of Venus transiting through Gemini and then moving into Cancer this upcoming month of July. We've got Mars transiting through Cancer. We've got the Sun hitting Rahu and opposing Saturn, Pluto. And then we've got a period of time where there are going to be more planets in watery signs than any other sign. And we've got Mercury going retrograde at some point this month. And I think also, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like Uranus will probably square Mars or Mercury or both in the month of July.
Both, probably both.
Yeah, because Uranus is 11 degrees, so yeah, it's probably going to square both. I'm just noticing that as I look at my little phone tablet here for the astrological stuff. So yeah, those are the major themes we're going to talk about. I don't have the exact dates for that stuff. Do you?
Venus moves into Gemini on 29th of June, while Venus again ingresses into Cancer on 23rd of July.
Okay.
So on July 7th, Mercury goes retrograde, and towards the end of July, I think 29th or 30th, Mercury retrogrades back into Gemini from Cancer. So it's a major shift in its retrograde motion. And
great.
That's
So
the theme, but yeah.
Did you have a preference of what we should start with?
I think people have kind of blown the Mars in Cancer out of proportion.
As always, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the natural benefic Jupiter, which is called as a Varsha Graha in Indian astrology, because it kind of moves from one sign to another, like from 1 year. So it takes almost a year to kind of move from one sign to another. So people give a lot of importance to that because it is a major ingress, and Jupiter is also a natural benefic. On the other hand, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu take a huge amount of kind of popularity in terms of their ingresses from one sign to another, or their retrograde or direct motions.
Sure.
And then comes Mars, because Mars is always a natural malefic. It almost kind of is as good as Mercury retrogrades in today's astrology. And Mars in Capricorn, Mars retrograde is surely a very unique phenomenon, because it happens once in every 2.5 years. So that's very interesting. But Mars ingressing into various signs is kind of it makes sense to talk about that, but there is no point in blowing things out of proportion, unless and until you have a personalized or a customized individual chart to kind of deal with it. So Mars in Cancer, I would really like to kind of deal or apply a little bit of Rudyarian approach here to talk about Mars in Cancer, because see, Mars is falling in Cancer, but that's not the end of it, and Mars is probably going to go, not probably, but surely it's going to go make its way into Leo. It's going to be emotionally challenging. It's going to be like we are not going to find ourselves at the right place during the right time, because this is during the right time. because Mars in Cancer is not necessarily a period of action, but Mars in Gemini was actually a period of action. So it's kind of that kind of a period where we want to kind of lie low and gather all our energies together with some kind of with some form of self nourishment that we can have, because there is a nice trine between Jupiter and Mars, and it's more of a reception that we have while Jupiter is in Scorpio, because Jupiter excels in Cancer, and the reception kind of works reasonably well. We cannot take that away from here. And on the other hand, we have Mars. I think kind of brings the much. I mean, Mars in Cancer brings the much needed moisture, because Mars is already dry and things are always dry. Uh, and Mars's ingress into Cancer kind of adds a lot of moisture. And once, I mean, it has already started raining in my place, and Chennai has kind of had the worst of water famines. And the entire city is kind of facing the shortage of water. And suddenly, for the past 3 or 4 days, we have been having some spells of rains, which is a
Great.
real it's a real good sign, and it's almost a sign of Mars and Cancer. So the
Great.
moisture is kind of coming down, and it's an encouraging thought.
Yeah, because
So
it's the pressure from the heat, right, that causes the moisture to precipitate into the clouds. Or
exactly.
I'm probably misusing the scientific terminology, but yeah.
Maybe I'm not an expert in science, so I cannot
So,
judge you.
but from what I understand, yeah, there's things have to, like, the temperature has to shift in a certain way, and there is a heat component that causes the clouds to release the rains. So Mars in Cancer, or really any water sign, but really Cancer, yeah, is really
Exactly.
knocking things loose. It's kind of like the clouds are like about to burst, and they just need that little push. So Mars in Cancer is interesting, as any fallen planet is. Um, and I think, yeah, to build on what you said, unless you had a couple more things you needed to say about
Now
it.
you can just go on. I'll kind of tell you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Mars in Cancer. This is a point where we have the energies of really wanting to take initiative and and take action in a way that gets us out of our, I don't know, our habits, so to speak, or gets us out of our routine, right? Mars is always bringing us into new territory. It's very spontaneous, is what I'm trying to say. And so when it's in Cancer, right, it's in a sign where it's inhibited from doing that, because Cancer moon wants to be comfortable, right? It
Mhm.
kind of becomes a bit myopic, is a way to think about it. Myopic in the sense of, like, it can't see the bigger picture. That energy can't see the bigger picture. It becomes all about me. The moon rules our appetites and our desires for comforts, right? It's the manas, which in ancient Indian philosophy, manas is the sensory input mind, which is basically just the mind that's like, oh, this is good, this is bad, right? Like, I need
Mhm.
more of this, less of this, because it's just like we're always being bombarded by various different um, sensory input data as we walk around and do our thing, right? Like, it's hot here, it's cold here, I want to be in the shade. Somebody honks their horn on the street or drives by in a sub with a big subwoofer, which happens in my neighborhood quite a bit, and I'm like, like, shut up. Right? All this stuff is just hitting the mind. So when this Mars piece of ourselves, right, which wants to just be very spontaneous and intuitive in a sense, and just kind of do things as they come, gets uh, gets commingled with that sort of mental sphere of things that really is not, there's no there, it's very passive. It's just being inundated. It starts to, our ability to really think straight and to really think ahead and forge ahead becomes inhibited. by our basically by our comforts. And in a lot of ways, this is also this leads us back to like our emotional wounds, you
Exactly.
know?
That's emotions is the most important thing here,
Yeah.
as we are talking about Cancer. And Mars is all about, sparkling emotions where we really don't want to kind of uh, lie low. But Mars and Cancer actually helps us to kind of stay subdued or maintain a subdued profile for I mean for its stay in Cancer. And it is going to be difficult to balance our emotions, because Mars is not really kind of worried about balancing things. Mars just kind of wants to push everything and kind of march forward, and that's basically what Mars wants to do. And the other thing is to kind of maintain our temperament. And I mean, Mars in Cancer kind of uh, puts a puts the kind of frustrating feeling in us, and if we don't get anything, or if we don't get to what or wherever we wanted to get to. So it is important to have a good amount of planning before we can do anything, because we don't want to have any kind of frustrations that probably we might not be able to control, which kind of will necessarily put us on a very bad social space. That is one of the most important things. And uh, and I heard once, like when Robert Hahn said that the real transit, uh, the impact of transit is actually felt at an inner level, and not at a very external manifestation level, because whatever happens within us is probably a reflective nature of what is happening outside us. But even if something doesn't necessarily happen outside, the thing can actually kind of, it can boil inside. So when we realize something that is happening from our own inner self, it is time to note that we are actually feeling the impact of a specific transit. So, and I could easily make a lot of sense with that, because last week, it's not last week, but it's 14th, and 14, 15, 16, that period where Saturn and Mars were exactly opposite. And I basically did not have any sleep, because that was the symposium week, even though I
Right.
had to do this. So, but that is again a classic Saturn Mars manifestation, where I had to kind of work through my way. It was super hard work. And I could the most important thing is that I'm still having the aftermath of that, because I did not have enough time to rest except for this week. So uh, the Saturn Mars kind of thing added a lot of mental fatigue and also physical fatigue. So that is something that I felt at an internal level. I did not lose anything. I didn't see anyone die,
Right.
but
Yeah.
still,
Okay.
the internal level of feeling in terms of what happens domestically to me, or what happens internally to me, is much more important than uh, looking at everything from a more event manifestation level, or more objective stuff, because
Yeah.
Rudyard kind of stresses upon the psychological impact, and I felt the psychological impact of Saturn Mars. So I
Right.
can have a huge you know say in terms of not to think about the transits from a manifestation event manifestation level, but just take it in a more organically internal level. And there is absolutely no need for us to panic about Mars and Cancer
Yeah.
or Saturn Aries. Yeah.
Yeah. There's never a need to panic about any of this stuff. It all brings different opportunities. And so, what can you do while Mars is in Cancer if you're finding that, some of the things that we're talking about, which are at this point a little nebulous, I think, but if you're finding that it's really affecting you, if you're noticing that you're maybe angrier or experiencing some more emotionally volatile situations, there are some simple things that you can do. I would recommend drinking more water than normal. Okay. If you're overheating, right, if you're, whether literally or metaphorically, drink cooling teas like chamomile tea, or I don't know, I'm sure there's a bunch of other herbal teas like mint tea, peppermint. things like that. Drink some cooling liquids. If you're having problems with digestion, right, eat some more fermented foods than you normally would, like kimchi or sauerkraut, or consume some more spicy things here and there, or just like ginger is also very good. A lot of ginger tea, or just cooking with ginger, and garlic too. Garlic can be helpful, but you don't want to overdo it, especially on the garlic. So you have to gauge in your own life what is happening, if this transit is affecting those areas for you, because obviously if you're too hot, you need to cool down. If you're not hot enough, you need to increase your internal fire and that sort of thing. And be aware too of like, if if you're gonna exert a lot of energy and effort in a direction to like break down a wall or break through some sort of barrier, and more internally than externally, make sure that no one's getting caught in the crossfire, right? Don't bring other people into it. Mars in Cancer is really traditionally it's a very it's indicative of quite a lot of anger that is oftentimes unexpressed and repressed, and it's anger covering sadness, right? So don't, you need to be, it's a chance to be aware of like, how much am I making something that I'm dealing with about another person when it really doesn't have anything to do with them, and then I'm dragging them into it and making it an external war, like doing our best to avoid arguments during this period is wise, unless you just need to have that confrontation with somebody or some group of people as like a release, like, because if you're somebody who doesn't stand up for themselves enough, right, then during this time you're gonna really feel the crushing weight of that, of like, I never stand up for myself, and now I feel really sad and depleted. Whereas if you're somebody who does overreach themselves, and kind of, you're a little hard on other people, especially people in your life, this is a period of time where you may feel they may fight back against you. There may be a lot of backlash. You may feel abandoned and so on.
That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. So we need to think about those things, and we need to, within your own space, get rid of things that Mars in Cancer is good for, just cutting off unnecessary nostalgic and sentimental attachments to the past that really don't serve you anymore. So if you have like a picture in your home or on your phone or whatever of, let's say, like an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or marital partner or something, and every time you look at it, it makes you feel sad, like, now is the time, just delete that. Get rid of it. Seriously. Like if you make peace with all this stuff, if you can, like if you, let's say something happened and on some street corner where you live, and every day you drive past that street corner, and every time you see it, you start to feel sad, you start to lament over it. Like, Mars in Cancer is a period of time where there will naturally be more energy, where if you consciously tap into it, you can make greater leaps and bounds by confronting those things directly. And that would be something to do more in like a meditation or a ritual, where you go inside, calm your mind, and really like imagine that space and reimagine it in a way that when you drive past it, you will not feel sad about it. Or the same thing goes for our memories, like, and our thoughts. Like, if you keep having a continuous thought or memory chain of memories come up for you recently, right, that where it's like, oh, every time you think of that, it's like this sadness. Well, Mars is here to just be like, no, stop, just burn it away, throw it into the fire. Like, you don't need to keep feeling sad. None of us need to keep feeling sad over some specific event, whether it happened when we were like 3 years old and it's coming up for us now, or it happened like a month ago or a year ago, right? So Mars in Cancer, the benefit of it, especially as a transit, is this opportunity to, burn away these sort of cobwebs that accumulate in our mind and in our home and so on. Get rid of the crap that is really putting a drain on you emotionally, if that makes sense. And
I think
I also,
it's really well said.
yeah, I also wanted to mention the nakshatras because it's always a great joy, to talk about nakshatras. Unless you had something else you wanted to throw in before we talk about that.
The one final thing that I want to talk about Mars in Cancer is that the entirety of a sign is always not considered to be bad, because when it comes to Cancer, the first 7 degrees of Mars is ruled by Mars bounds,
Oh,
and
right.
then final 4 degrees will be Saturn's bounds. So the 11 degrees in the front, and also at the end of Cancer, which leads up to Leo, obviously it's also Gandanta. So the kind of remaining 19 degrees in the middle is going to be reasonably pacifying, especially for Mars, even though it is kind of uh, it is fallen in Cancer. So
Yeah.
there is nothing really to panic on that note. And to talk about Navamsha, I think that is again an interesting thing, because Mars will be Vargotama when it's in the first Navamsha of Cancer, which is Punarvashu 4. And
Yeah.
then we will have Mars enter Scorpio when it's placed in Pushya Nakshatra, fourth Pada. And then again, Mars will move into Capricorn when it moves into Ashlesha Nakshatra, fourth Pada. So at the end of the day, things are not as bad as we always imagine when a planet is placed in its fallen sign, because there are going to be various essential minor dignities. So I don't call it as minor dignities, they're essential minor dignities in my opinion. So the planet is really going to kind of uh, have a lot of good times or good zones that it is going to hit in a particular sign, even though it is
Yeah.
the sign of its fall. So I don't necessarily, I mean, and you mentioned a very important point where uh, it is difficult to kind of control our anger. And on the other hand, I just wanted to add to that point, like aggression can always be unpredictable and not so calculative when Mars is in Cancer. So it is important to kind of make sure
Right.
that we uh, we put our aggression or showcase our aggression in the right manner, or possibly it is better if we don't showcase our aggression itself when Mars
Right.
is Cancer. So I think that's pretty much for what I had, and I think you can just talk about nakshatras.
Okay, great. I'm just trying to remember what planet rules Punarvasu.
Jupiter.
Jupiter does. That's what I thought. Okay, cool. Great. So yeah, and one more thing I'll add to that, very well said, is like we can think of the energy of Mars in Cancer as a fire hydrant that needs to be, if you ever see them open a fire hydrant, right, it's kind of a violent release of water, right? So the fire hydrant can either explode and just be this kind of spray of water, right? This spray of emotion and an energy, or it can be, opened and attached to a hose and used conscientiously for putting out a fire, right? Or anything
So
else, really. So that's kind of the energy of Mars in Cancer. It can either go those two ways, right? Any placement can be very productive, of course, and so on and so forth. But yeah, the energy of the nakshatras is interesting because we've had Mars in Punarvasu, which is a very like philosophical kind of spacious, aloof nakshatra, associated with Aditi, the mother of the gods, the mother of space. And it's interesting because it's mostly Gemini, right? But when that last pada is the beginning of Cancer, where I believe Mars is now as we're making this,
yes.
um, yeah, that is when, in a way, you could think about that as like you have this mother of all space, which is it's hard to relate to, and then in that last pot of Cancer is kind of when she steps down, steps down to actually become the nourisher in Pushya, which is the next nakshatra, right? So you have this kind of transition point where the Divine Mother is becoming more relatable in a sense, and so yeah, I just thought that was a cool idea. I just had that idea just now,
And just
and
going back to, I just want to go back to
yeah,
Punarvashu to add something. Uh, the the patterns that we had in Gemini is probably going to come with us in Cancer because of Punarvashu Nakshatra.
yeah,
But you really want to kind of, um, and whatever we carry from Gemini is all about action oriented when it comes to Mars. But the thing is really, we don't want to engage in a lot of action, and we want to kind of rethink about what we are doing.
right.
Uh, so we don't want to kind of have the repeating patterns continue as Mars makes its way into Pusha Nakshatra.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And Mars in Gemini wants to go in 1,000 different directions, right? Is
Uh,
experimenting with a lot of things, kind of just all of a sudden, seeing what they're like. I know I kind of was doing that actually, in terms of looking for work, and it was funny. It was like, okay, so like I've done all these things, but realistically, only a couple are going to bear fruit, and then even then there were things where it's like, oh, this looks good, and then you look into it more and you're like, this is kind of bogus. Like, I don't like what they're doing here. This was like an online guitar lesson thing, and I was like, okay, this actually is like, it looked good at first glance, but now it's not. And so I encountered a lot of things like that. So again, though, Mars in Cancer, any planet in Cancer really needs to focus. Cancer is a sign of intense focalization of energies because it is because it's the moon, you know, and 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 because it's also the natural fourth house, the fourth sign and stuff. So there's like
there we
a,
go.
there's like establishing some kind of, there's anchoring. The moon anchors us to something, right? The moon we get attached to something and stuff. So that's very Cancer thing. So planets in Cancer need to focus, and so as Mars is in Cancer now, like it becomes time to focus on our energies on something that is really going to nourish us and bear fruit. And then when it moves into Pushya, that's where the nourishment factor really comes into play. Excuse me. And Pushya is a strange nakshatra because it is it's associated with all this like nourishing, good thing of like cow's milk and things like that, right? But then it's ruled by
Saturn.
Saturn. And and its deity is Brihaspati as well.
Brihaspati, which is
Brihaspati,
Jupiter.
yeah, which is Jupiterian. So it's a very strange nakshatra. And for those of you who use it, this is the nakshatra that we calculate the yogi point from, which is a very powerful point in the horoscope that can tell us where the person is going to derive a significant amount of nourishment from. And that usually means wealth in the material world, but it can also mean other kinds of nourishment as well: mental, emotional, spiritual, artistic, and so on. So it's a very useful point, and this is the nakshatra that it's derived from. So Mars is not really much of a nourisher. Mars is more like in Pushya. Mars is like, okay, we're going to nourish you through pain and fire and
And
torture.
basically being trying to show the practical side of it in terms of what
Yeah,
next and stuff.
exactly. If anything, when Mars is moving through Pushya, we can pay attention to that. Just look it up and just be aware of it. It's like, okay, this is a period where, in a sense, the stuff of life that's really harsh can be nourishing, right? It's like it's like drinking a very bitter tea for your liver or for your kidneys or something. There's some, I don't know, some people have a very hard time consuming bitter teas and whatnot. I really like bitter things, so I have no
Uh,
problem consuming that stuff. But this could be a time where everything is kind of like a bitter tea, and actually, it might be a time where you might want to drink a bitter tea. You might want to engage in, you gotta do some research, but there might be a good bitter herb or bitter tea out there for you to consume if you're experiencing some challenges and whatnot. There's this wonderful Chinese tea that I have called Ku Ding tea, and it is some of the most bitter stuff I've ever had. But man, it is really medicinal. Like if I'm sick and I drink that, I feel like I feel good. I feel empowered by this like brutal bitterness of it. So, things like that I think are good when Mars is in Pushya, just as a general principle. And then, if you're finding that in your everyday life, you're experiencing some challenging circumstances, you can look at it as like, okay, if I can if I can learn from this, I can be nourished. And sometimes learning from it means realizing, okay, this is emotionally abusive. I need to just stop engaging with this person or this experience and move on. Right? That's nourishing. It's like, it's nourishing to get rid of something that is soul sucking. It's literally nourishing in the sense that it opens you up for new experiences, as long as you don't repeat the previous experience, as long as you seek out consciously stuff that's not going to replicate those previous experiences, right? That's nourishment. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at that. And then finally, we have Mars in Silesia, which is one of the most difficult nakshatras, which also features the Gandanta at the very last pada, right?
Gandanta.
And that nakshatra is going to be ruled by Mercury, right? Mm-hmm. And Aslesha is associated with the Sarpas, which are serpent energy. So Mars in Aslesha is really the most difficult part, really. And I think that's also where it has its debilitation point, is in Aslesha in Cancer. So
I think the classic interpretation of Mars fallen in transiting to Aslesha nakshatra is kind of you're getting jealous about someone else's action, but you are unable to necessarily act, and that is basically the frustration of your inability coming out. But soon you'll kind of realize that is not your cup of tea, that someone else is doing. So I think it is Mars is probably giving us a reality check in terms of what we can do and what we cannot do, and how we can act and how we cannot act. So the jealousy and trying to put off someone else is not necessarily going to work. So you really don't want to kind of engage your energy towards negativity. So, and that is again the basic and the most underlying theme of Mars in Cancer, is kind of make sure that you engage or you channelize your energy in the right path, doing the right thing and not the wrong path and the wrong thing. So I think you can continue.
Absolutely. So on that note, I'm actually going to go back to the beginning of Mars's transit in Cancer and just take us through a couple steps here, right? We have the last part of Punarvasu, which is really from a Mars level, where we were going in all these directions while it was in Gemini, and perhaps getting into all these philosophies or ideas about life. But in that last pada of Punarvasu in Cancer, the Mars energy slows down dramatically, and we start to feel like, oh yeah, okay, have all these avenues and all these ideas and all these contacts and all these things I've been doing, but they're not really fulfilling. So what is fulfilling? How can I be nourished, right? And then we move into Pushya, where the nourishment can take place, but it's going to take place through cutting things away, through encountering trying circumstances that where we feel possibly very depleted or cut and bruised and things like that. And so it's really like it's a trial by fire kind of nourishment. And then we get to Aslesha, where depending on how we nourished ourselves or dealt with the question of nourishing, the theme of nourishing, and really breaking away from things that are not actually nourishing, that's really the theme of Mars in Pushya. Then in Aslesha, right, we'll either become jealous and covetous, as you were saying, right, or we can become we can start to sort of draw upon hidden wells of energy for nourishment and whatnot. We can start to actually, because serpent energy is very hidden, it's very mysterious, right? And it has this connotation of regeneration because serpents shed their skin, right? But it also has a connotation of venom, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
so it's more, it becomes about this, and this dichotomy of serpents. Our mutual friend Theo, he once talked about how you can think about the nagas versus the sarpas, and that the sarpas are like the lower manifestation of serpent power, and the nagas are like the higher, wiser manifestation of serpent energy, right? I really liked that metaphor that Theo came up with. And so anyway, so that's a good way to think about it too, is like, do you start to actually put your actions into like building something with what you do have, with what you really do have that you really can rely on? Or do you become like covetous and jealous of what other people have, and start to try to, and comparing yourself, and kind of, demolishing your own house in order to take out your neighbor's house? Because if I can't have that, nobody can. That's kind of that sort of inharmonious
exactly.
mentality. So
Sure. Yeah, I think we turned this video into July astrology of July 2019 to Mars and Cancer,
yeah,
but
we kind of did, huh?
I think we gave a really a nice treatment of Mars and Cancer,
Yeah.
and I mean, so I think it's good time to move on to next, because we are already into 40 minutes of this.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, should we just make another video?
No, I don't think so. I think it's
Okay.
good to kind of give ample treatments to some sensitive uh, topics like this.
Yeah.
So the next important phenomenon is to talk about is Mercury going retrograde. So which is on 7th July, and Mercury retrograde is like see, it's again, it happens like once in every 3.5 months or so.
Yeah.
So it's not a rare phenomenon, but Mercury retrograde is one of those frustrating periods, like when Moon actually transits into your eighth house. So it is that kind of a frustrating period where you might have to review, reassess, or redo various things. But when Mercury is actually retrograde in Cancer, things are entirely different, and we're going to again. I mean, it again relates to all those themes that in terms of nakshatras
Yeah.
that you just talked about, in terms of how planets kind of transit through various nakshatras like Punarvasu, Pushya, and then Ashlesha. So, and in this case, we are talking about the ruler of Gemini, I mean, making a transit from Punarvasu 3, which is in Gemini, to Punarvasu 4, which is Cancer. And even though there is not a lot of, even though there is not nakshatra shift, but the the entire theme kind of shifts, because Mercury kind of moves from its own domicile to Cancer, which is not necessarily a very happier place for Mercury. So, I mean, Mercury wants to deal with things rationally and logically,
Right.
and Mercury really doesn't want to deal with things emotionally. And Mercury is kind of opposite to Moon in most of the cases. And if Mercury is logical mind, Moon is our emotional mind.
Right.
And
Right.
let's say how kind of Mercury, when it falls into Cancer, Mercury is forced to kind of think about the emotional quotient of a specific human being, and we are
Right.
kind of uh, forced to kind of have the empathetic and sympathetic feeling towards fellow human beings, and that's a good thing to have. So there are good things that Mars can signify. However, when Mars goes retrograde,
You mean
um,
Mercury?
sorry, Mercury. Yeah, I meant Mercury. So things are different when Mercury goes retrograde, and I think it is all about revisiting some of those emotional bondages or barriers or setbacks that we had
Yeah.
uh, en route to Mars's. Uh,
Yeah, it kind of just
point.
mirrors the Mars stuff pretty well that we were talking about, especially since it goes retrograde in Pusha. So again, right, really, are you still there? I think I lost you for a moment. Uh-oh. Okay, well, I think I've lost Ashwin for a moment, so I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll continue talking about this, see if he gets back in. But the idea here is that Mercury going retrograde in Pushya Nakshatra specifically could easily represent this theme of basically having to, again, really critically think about what's nourishing you and what's not nourishing you. So in line again with that Mars theme of trial by fire and whatnot, right? It's thinking about, okay, yeah, what's nourishing you and what's not nourishing you, and so on. And I think, it's, I love these little kind of omenistic moments while making these videos, because we're talking about Mercury retrograde, and then Ashwin's internet presumably has just cut out. So it's very much a Mercury retrograde kind of thing. Be careful what you think about and talk about, because it does manifest it on a certain level. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. I think that there's always more to talk about, and we could go on and on and on. But I think the biggest factors here are Mars transiting through Cancer and Mercury, sure, going retrograde, kind of adding to those themes and whatnot. Oh, okay, Ashwin, you're potentially back. I was just about to end the video, so perhaps we'll continue. All right, you're back, man. I was literally just about to end the video, so if you want to keep going.
I'm back, yeah.
Cool, yeah, if you want to keep going, we can. I haven't stopped recording.
Yeah, we can just go on, no problem.
So yeah, I was just telling these fine folks that are tuning into this video that we were talking about Mercury retrograde and your internet cut out. I thought that was funny.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, what we are showing the literal manifestations of Mercury retrograde. So yeah.
So I was just saying, going retrograde in Pushya again means like analyzing logically what is nourishing me and what is not. Really having to think about those things, because it is going to interfere with our communication, our sense of community, our sense of fellowship, friendships, things like that. And the negative side of Mercury in Cancer is really the logical mind getting overwhelmed by emotionality, by subjectivity of likes and dislikes, right? Where the moon mind says, I really, I can't stand my neighbor's mess over there, right? The Mercury mind says, okay, is it actually personal to me? No. Is it my problem? No. What can I do to maybe speed this along? Can I offer my neighbor some help in helping them clean up the mess that I don't want to look at? Right? Is that a bad option? Is it a better option to complain to the city officials because my neighbor really hates me or something like that?
I have a slightly different version of that same example. It's like, what does the moon mind say? It says like, okay, he's my neighbor. Maybe I just should not complain because he's my neighbor. But what does a Mercury mind say? No, it doesn't matter if he's my neighbor or if he's my friend. Whatever mistake done is done, and he needs to face whatever it takes to face. So that's what. So I mean, there are different cases of rationalization as we can talk about. But,
but it's that rationalization of it, right? Like, moon wants to be comfortable. Maybe I shouldn't say anything because that's my neighbor, as you were saying.
No.
So yeah. So no, it's not a, that is kind of the challenge that we face with Mercury being retrograde in Cancer, I think, just generally speaking, regardless of the nakshatra. But I'm not a fan of freaking out about Mercury retrograde, so I think we should just move on to
do I? So, but there is
something else.
Yeah, sure. But there is just one little point in terms of talking about how Mercury just goes back to Gemini in its retrograde motion, which is a major shift. And again, kind of, there is a lot of repetitions that is probably going to be done. And there is a lot of things that is attached to Mars in Cancer, Mars in Gemini. Mercury in Gemini, Mercury in Cancer, again Mercury back to Gemini. So the themes that were prominent in when Mercury and Mars were in Gemini is probably going to kind of revisit and reappear in front of you in terms of speaking of this particular month, because I mean both the phenomenons happened during this month, like Mercury stations retrograde and then again retrogrades back to Gemini in the same month. So, but I think we can just move on just to talk about Venus in Cancer, which is on 23rd of June, and that should probably I think we have two more things to talk about, but let's just talk about Venus in Cancer, which is on 23rd of June.
So Venus is, pretty soon going to be headed into Gemini. And we did talk about that, like you said, in our previous video.
Yeah, we spoke about Venus's conjunction with Rahu as well. So
okay, great. So I
think we kind of gave a long discussion in terms of Venus's connection with Rahu and how you want to get into a relationship and all those things. So
that's right. Yeah. So check out our video for June if you want to learn more about Venus's transit through Gemini. But like Ashwin
directly
said,
go to the final 10 minutes if you want to listen. Yeah.
But like you said, it'll be going late July into Cancer. And Venus in Cancer, it's funny because it's traditionally it's in an enemy sign in Cancer. So it's, again, we're not getting, Mars, Mercury, and Venus in Cancer. These are not great places for these planets to be traditionally, right? Because Venus in Cancer, it's too much appetites, it's too much passion, too much desire, right? Venus becomes arguably, right, instead of the artist that pursues like a beautiful dream, it's sort of like more like a gluttonous chasing of beauty. It's this kind of like where you have passion, which is very Venusian, become fused with like personal desires to just have our emotional needs met, right? So it becomes like, I've talked about this before. Moon says, I want ice cream. Venus says, I specifically want peach ice cream.
Exactly.
With dark chocolate sprinkles or something like that, right? So when Venus is in Cancer or with the moon, theoretically, you have a situation, unless there's other things that mitigate this, and there can be, but you have a situation where it's like, the person wants to eat peach ice cream with dark chocolate sprinkles all the time, right? Like It becomes too much pleasure seeking kind of at least that's how I would look at it. So
sure, but as you said, it's an overdosage of everything when Venus is in Cancer. But one thing that I would like to add is that Venus kind of puts a rationalizing break in terms of whatever Cancer or Moon has to offer, because there is no end to the needs of Moon, but there is always a limit or an expectation to whatever Venus desires.
Yeah.
So there is a specific thing or line or even a standard that Venus sets for itself, but Moon just cares about what it wants and what it needs. So when Venus is in Cancer, it is a battle of all those things, like whether we're kind of confused in terms of we need to get what we want, or we need to get both what we want and what we desire.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of conflict that we are going to have with between the Venus and Moon stuff that is going on. So but I don't necessarily kind of tag this as a very bad placement, because
no, it's not horrible.
Yeah, it's not horrible. But maybe the conjunction with Mars might make it a bit hard. But still, sure. As it is, Mars doesn't have a lot of dignity here, and probably it's. And the other thing, as you said, all these planets are getting into a zone where they're not entirely super comfortable or happy being there. And these are all personal planets. So one thing that you can take away here is that there is a lot of inner changes that you need to make in yourself. There is a lot of personal nourishment and personal rectifications that we need to make, because these are all personal planets and we don't have any troubles from outside, but the trouble is actually from within your own self. And
Yeah.
it is largely related to how your psychological setup or psychological apparatus is kind of functioning at this point of time. So if there is anything that is going wrong, I think you should just check yourself first and then look at the external surroundings or the considerations. So be very wary about whatever is happening in your domestic surroundings. So that's what I would say with all these planets in Cancer. Yes, pretty
Yeah,
much.
don't get too drunk. Right?
Yeah, no,
When
no,
Venus, Mars, and Mercury and the Sun are in Cancer, don't get too drunk. Okay.
yeah. So, and that Venus, Mars, Mercury, and Sun brings us to another important phenomenon where there is a water trine between all these planets in Cancer. Jupiter is in Scorpio, and Moon will be in Pisces for 2 days. I think it's
Sure.
on 23rd or 24th of July.
Yeah, and so
So
Jupiter does kind of help out these planets in Cancer.
exactly,
Kind of
yes,
like brings out the Brahmanical side of Cancer, which is, basically um, just like engaging in really auspicious actions, like right action, doing things like meditation or studying holy scriptures, mystical texts, or seva. Seva is good as well, which is service in Sanskrit, right? Seva is, cooking for people is very good. Nourishing and feeding other people. If you don't feel nourished, if you don't feel cared for, go care for somebody else. Go help out somebody else, like that's a great way to circumvent your own negativity, right? Is to help somebody else if you feel like you need to be helped. I mean, there are times where that's unhealthy for sure, but that we're not talking about that. We're talking about just kind of the general thing. And so we've got about 5 planets, right, in watery rashis when that happens, plus the moon. What? Oh, your mic cut out, or you're muted. You're muted. Yeah.
6 including the Moon. Yeah.
And actually being muted is a watery Rashi thing. They're mute signs. So again,
Exactly.
another phenomenon as we talk about this stuff, it manifests directly for us in the video. But so yeah, actually that's a good time to, especially with Mercury retrograde while it's in Cancer, and Jupiter being retrograde in Scorpio, and when the moon is in Pisces during that time for just a couple of days, shut up,
And
speak less,
just a
listen
quick
more. You don't know everything. We don't know everything. Listen more, right? There's a lot of in our generation, the millennial generation, especially in the West. I don't know how it is in India and in Asia and whatnot, but in the West, millennials, we think that we know everything. Right? We think that we can just do whatever we want and we can figure it out, and we're so great, we're so special. We need to shut up and listen to
and that's a
our
universal
elders.
phenomenon.
We need to shut up. And so especially when there's all these watery rashis, shut up. You don't know what's happening. If you knew what was happening, you wouldn't be going through a potentially emotionally tumultuous time, as we keep talking about, right? So for those of us, what I'm trying to say, for those of us who are going through an emotionally rough period with all these watery planets, watery rashis being activated, we need to shut up if somebody else is going to give it to us straight and in an attempt to pull us out of that swamp, right? Otherwise, we'll just sink deeper into the swamp. So,
Yeah. So just a quick point to kind of have a link with what you said, seva or service, and that is related to Saturn. And interestingly, we have all the planets in Cancer opposing Saturn, at least from a whole sign point of view. So that is yet another important phenomenon where, again, I see fatigue, personal planets in Cancer opposing Saturn.
well, Saturn's
So
in Sag, though, isn't he?
yeah, sorry, Saturn. So where was the opposition? I think there was some opposition.
That was the Sun, Rahu,
Sorry, yeah,
Saturn.
Sun and Saturn's. Uh, uh,
That's
like
before
for
all
the
of this
first
stuff.
15, yeah, for the
Yeah.
first 15 days, that's like Gemini and Sagittarius. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I
let's do
wanted to
that
talk about.
next. Let's do that next. Let's finish the water thing.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of done with water things. I've
All right,
spoken
cool.
on
Me too.
emotions, so
Cool. Okay,
so
good. Yeah. So Saturn, Sun, we move on to Saturn and the nodes and the Sun and Pluto even is in there, right? That's an opposition that will happen.
and there is a total eclipse that's happening on July 2nd, so that is also one
Right.
interesting thing. And I'm not a firm believer of eclipse as a very bad thing, because I know eclipse has given rise to a lot of great things as well. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
So to talk about Saturn Sun opposition, I think it is important to kind of have a good idea of what we can do and what we cannot do. As Lars just said, there is a lot of things that we cannot do, and we cannot kind of go ahead and propagate saying things that we can do, but in reality we cannot do. We might be kind of having, I mean, we might be overconfident about certain things, but it is important to have reality check, especially with Mercury going retrograde. It is certainly important to have a lot of reality check in terms of our abilities. Mars is also fallen in Cancer. Again, whatever we want to do might not necessarily turn out to be what we wanted to be or what we intended to be. So, Sun falling in the nodal axis and also opposing Saturn is kind of a very tricky period in terms of where we put our reputation at stake
Yeah.
because of our inability to do something, and our our presence, social presence or public presence or whatever it may be, is easily vulnerable to get damaged. So that is one of those really sensitive things that we are exposed to during this period of time. And consciousness about our own abilities is really important. And let's not pile up a lot of tasks and duties uh,
Yeah.
without knowing what we can do, because that can certainly add to a lot of fatigue, obviously. And also, if we cannot do and if we cannot keep up our word, our reputation is at stake and probably lost. So these are little things that I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about.
Very good. Yeah, this is kind of a state, expanding on what you were saying, this is kind of a state of avidya, which means basically ignorance or lack of wisdom, lack of knowledge, right? So, um, yeah, Rahu and Saturn act very similar in certain manners. And one of those manners is to kind of obstruct what reality really is, like to create like an illusion of things. And so with the sun being hit by the nodes and by Saturn, like this could be a period where you may think you're responsible for more than you really are. You may think you're supposed to go in a certain direction and achieve something great, but that thinking will not necessarily be indicative of a genuine feeling or intuition. It will be more like this sense of agitation of like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, it's okay, I just got to do this. I just got to do something. I just got to make something work. And it's kind of like you're just like throwing a dart at a board with like lots of different things on it, but that doesn't lead to harmony or empowerment or dharma, right? That oftentimes leads to just putting ourselves into a frustrating, depleting situation where we believe that we need to do these things based on some false pretense or some false idea, or again of coveting what other people have, right? Saturn, Rahu can be associated with covetous behavior and avarice. Avarice is where that's the worst of it. Avarice is where you not only want what somebody else has, but you want what somebody else has and you want to see them suffer and be miserable, because there's a hatred factor. So it can turn and it's always a self-hatred thing that gets projected or or becomes exterior to yourself. And so basically it's a time to be really cognizant of what you believe your life's mission is versus what it really, really actually is. And don't plunge into any sort of situation or circumstance, prematurely while that's happening. The sun is going to be in, Punarvasu, right? And the thing about that is that Punarvasu, like I said before, has all these ideas and all these philosophies and all these things it can contemplate and look at, right? But only maybe one of those things is going to be really, really real, right? That last pada of Punarvasu is kind of like the only real part of it. So, Sun, Rahu, and Punarvasu want to go towards all these attractive states of being that are idealistic, that are fabricated by the mind, by philosophical notions and stuff like that. And Saturn is in Mula Nakshatra, which is very much about getting to the root of things. So it's really like kind of a running away from the root of our fears and our suffering into these grand notions of like, ooh, I could be this, I could be that, I could do this, I could do that. So there's really a lot at play there, and it could be easy to get lost in that for some of us.
Sure.
And I think that does it for me. That's all I have to say about that. So
I think we pretty much spoke about almost everything, and that kind of sums up for this month. So I still didn't kind of we our dual consultation is something that I still did not release it. So that is something that is kind of going to come up very soon. It's already there on my website, and Lars and I
it's on my website too.
Okay, yeah. So Lars and I offer dual consultations where we both sit and analyze a person's chart and talk to a client, which is one of the unique things that there is a separate video which will be on both our channels possibly. So that is one thing. And apart from that, you can just go on and check Lars's website for personalized readings, which is larspanaro.astrology.com. And you can also check out the magazine, which is Celestial Vibes magazine.com. So, and I think that sums it up, and we'll see you next time.
Okay.